The Biden administration has said it would reopen the US Consulate in Jerusalem, but it has yet to do so. For years, it served as a de facto embassy to the Palestinians. Israel rejects the plan to reopen it. A brief history here. President Donald Trump shut down the consulate and moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem back in 2018. The move infuriated the Palestinians. Israel views Jerusalem as its eternal, undivided capital. The Palestinians seek the eastern part of the city as capital of their hoped-for state. And joining me now to discuss is Rabbi Yaakov Menken, Managing Director for the Coalition for Jewish Values. Rabbi Menken, welcome back. In a recent editorial authored by you, you wrote, quote, "It would be a significant setback for indigenous rights and civil liberties if the United States were to create a Palestinian consulate in Jerusalem." Please explain.
Thank you so much for having me back. And really, it's pretty straightforward. One of the things I do in that piece is walk through the history, not just Jewish history, but Christian history. They recently found another synagogue built in the town of Migdal, which was built slightly before the lifetime of, at least as far as the archaeologists can determine, Mary Magdalene. The only people who called that area Palestine were the European colonialists, the Greeks and the Romans, who came to dominate somebody else's Holy Land. And that is why to now recognize Palestine and to recognize that the marauders who invaded from elsewhere have equal rights to the indigenous in the Holy Land would actually be a step backwards.
You also wrote in the editorial, if President Biden does reopen the consulate, it would essentially contradict the fact that he calls himself a devout Catholic. How so?
You know, I'm actually going to point out that that was something put in by an editor because I said, I'm a rabbi. I can't really tell Catholics what Catholicism is. With that said, I suspect that most of your viewers would agree with what I said, which is that, you know, when you look at Catholic history, Christian history, the Bible of the Christian world, not just Mary Magdalene, but the fact that Jesus came from a town called Bethlehem, which means in Hebrew, house of bread. And he moved, he was actually from a place called Nazareth, which means shoot. And he moved to Jerusalem, Ir Shalom, the city of peace. All of these things speak to the Jewish history of that location, and that is why it is so critical to the Christian narrative.
Now, Palestinians will argue opening a consulate, reopening I should say, would demonstrate U.S. support for Palestinians and help bolster their aim for an independent state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Your reaction to that?
Well, I think that that's exactly the problem. The seat of the government of the Palestinian Authority is Ramallah. If one needs a consulate, that's where it belongs. East Jerusalem is just a name that the Jordanians stuck on that place. To believe that East Jerusalem is distinct from West Jerusalem, it means to claim that the Western Wall and the old city of Jerusalem and David's city and David's citadel are all occupied territory when Israel allows Jews to live there. Remember that under Jordanian rule, the rights of other religious minorities was not respected, and in fact, every Jew in East Jerusalem was ethnically cleansed out, and that's how it became an Arab city. It's simply not fair to not allow the indigenous to return.
So ultimately, why do you think the Biden administration is either hesitating or delaying this?
I think that they're hesitating because they recognize that the Israelis simply have said no. Because the Israelis all understand this to be true, that the quote-unquote Palestinians, Arabs, have no legitimate claim to say that, in fact, Jerusalem should be theirs or divided equally. It simply doesn't make sense. It'll require that religious liberties be tossed aside, and all the freedoms that Israel has brought to that region would be withdrawn from East Jerusalem the same way that, sadly, they've been withdrawn from Bethlehem and Ramallah, which is, by the way, why Christians are moving out.
Rabbi Menken, we're going to leave it right there, and thank you so much for your time today. Great to see you.
Thank you for having me.